It is my pleasure to introduce you to our next species, the American Bellflower, Campanulastrum americanum, Campanulastrum, new word Americanum, in the Campanulaceae. It's a pretty distinct plant to recognize once it's in flower. You can see here it's got 5 petals. The 5 petals have lobes in which they're free from each other, but you can also see at the base of this flower that the 5 petals are fused together and they actually form a short tube. You can see the stamens, but one of the most interesting and characteristic aspects of this plant is that the stamens are already withered by the time the flower opens, which is a pretty bizarre thing to happen in a flower. So you never see the fully developed stamens when you look at the flower. But it also helps you distinguish it from any other flower that you'll see in that the stamens are already withered. I'm going to read you from the flora of the Chicago region exactly what goes on in this flower. And I will translate because there's a lot of science talk in here. So under the genus Campanulastrum, the authors say, the flowers are protandrous. Protandrous means that the male parts mature before the female parts. In bud, just before anthesis, and here is a bud. Just before anthesis, anthesis means flower opening. The anthers introrsely dehisce, and the pellucid pollen grains coat the pubescent style shaft. What does that mean? The anthers introrsely dehisce, that means they open to the inside. They open towards the style as opposed to away from the style, as in most other flowers. And the pellucid pollen grains, that means pollen grains that you can see through, coat the style shaft, the pubescent style shaft. So the style has hairs that gather the pollen onto it. The vestiture of the style consists of unicellular antrorse setae. We'll skip that one. The function of the setae is to grab the pollen from the adnate anthers as the style elongates when the corolla opens. A feeding frenzy awaits the reproductive parts because the pollen grocery store is about to open. The bees try frenetically to get inside of the closed corollas. They smell the pollen and nectar. Megachile campanuli females, that's a species of bee, Megachile campanuli, use their mandibles to force the narrow bud opening apart, and the small lasioglossum species, such as Lasioglossum catali, claw and bite at the entrance. Also, before a flower opens, 5 lenticular apertures develop at the base of the corolla between the petals. So there's little windows that open when the flower is still in bud. The scent of pollen and nectar wafts from these openings and stimulates the frenetic behavior of the bees, who peek through the aperture and run or fly up to the unopened corolla apex to bite at it. Often, however, the apical portion of the style shaft elongates beyond the unopened flower, which attracts small bees who remove the pollen from the exposed tip. So what's going on here is, in bud, the anthers open up, release their pollen to the inside, coat the style shaft with their pollen, and then as the style starts to grow through the petals, it presents pollen to several different species of bees. Reading on, finally the flower opens and the anthers almost immediately collapse. The residual pollen on the anthers firstly is removed. This part of the pollen removal process occurs when the corolla opens, typically in the morning. Toward late morning and in the afternoon, the small Hylaeus and Lasioglossum females, those are two genera of bees, scavenge pollen that has fallen upon the inside of the petals, and they continue to lick and collect pollen from the tip of the pubescent style shaft. The pubescence of the shaft, however, begins to absorb into the style or becomes invaginated as the pollen is removed. The style soon becomes smooth as the bees collect pollen. Indeed, a dissection of the fresh style after invagination can locally reinflate the setae after squeezing the lamina with tweezers, which I encourage you all to do. Here's another look at the flower, and with a view towards the female parts, you can see that the parts of the pistil that are visible are the stigma and the style. The style has become smooth, all the pollen has been removed. Another characteristic of this particular species is that it has stigma lobes that are three-lobed, which represents three different components of the ovary at the base. This species and the entire Campanulaceae has an inferior ovary, which means the ovary is actually below the petals and the sepals. And that ovary is made up of three parts. The American bellflower, Campanulastrum americanum, is the only species in the genus Campanulastrum, and it is a common species of mesic to dry mesic woodlands and savannas, which means middle water relations or drier water relations. In the Campanulaceae and in this particular species, it is very common to have leaves that have toothed margins and are alternately arranged along the stem. Thank you for your kind attention to the American bellflower.